Good morning, good afternoon, good evening as everyone's joining. We'll give everyone a few minutes to join. Hi, welcome for everyone joining on the line. We'll just give it another minute or two before we get started. Make sure everyone has had a chance to join and log into the audio. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for everyone joining. My name is Jennifer Park, and I am joining you today from RTI International, along with my colleagues Jonathan Schwartz, Amrita Matani, Bukola Ehimati, Darsono Hartono, and Thaddeus Binamungu. We are pleased to present to you today on nature, wealth, and power, the multiple dimensions of natural resources management. Next screen, please. So first, we wanted to take you through the agenda for today's session. We're going to start off by covering the learning objectives, what we hope you all will take away from the session today. We'll give an overview of the Nature, Wealth, and Power framework, what it is, and how we went about analyzing the framework in our research project, which we'll explain in more detail. We will present the methods we undertook for our research project, and also the primary findings that came out of that effort. We will then make a presentation of 3 case studies that represent the 3 dimensions of nature, wealth, and power, and those will be presented by my colleagues Thaddeus Binamungu, Darsono Hartono, and Bukola Ehimati to demonstrate some real-world examples of nature, wealth, and power dimensions. And then finally, we will close with a bit of time for participant discussion and Q&A. Next slide, please. For the participant discussion, we'd like you all to begin thinking now about these 2 questions. And I believe my colleagues are putting them in the chat boxes as well to get your creative juices flowing. The first one is, what are the barriers and conversely, the potential solutions to more integrated development programming, like the one promoted by the Nature, Wealth, and Power framework. The second, beyond the example that you will hear shared from the USAID Nigeria EWASH team, what other ways could the Nature, Wealth, and Power framework be applied to water conservation specifically? If you have answers to either of these questions or comments about anything at any point during the presentation, please feel free to go ahead and enter those in either the Zoom or Pathable chat boxes. And please indicate the speaker to whom you are referring your question or comment so we can most efficiently answer. Next slide, please. So the learning objectives. So here's what we hope that you will take away from today's presentation. We hope you'll gain an understanding of the Nature, Wealth, and Power framework, its dimensions, and their interconnectedness. You'll see how the Nature, Wealth, and Power framework still applies roughly 20 years later via presentation of those 3 case studies that I mentioned. We hope you'll come away with an understanding of how Nature, Wealth, and Power can facilitate the design of balanced and equitable approaches to natural resources management, such as helping maintain ecosystem services for nature and communities, including water resources, carbon capture, forest-based livelihoods, and community development. And finally, we hope you'll come away with an understanding of how NWP can address complex challenges in natural resources management by breaking them down into smaller, more manageable issues, and also in ways that can account for the partnerships, resources, governance structures, and other elements that are needed for a successful development project. Next slide, please. So, overview of the Nature, Wealth, and Power framework. So Nature, Wealth, and Power was first developed with USAID funding nearly 20 years ago in 2002. And it was then updated in 2013, which is referred to as NWP 2.0. At its core, Nature, Wealth, and Power is a systems approach to development programming. It posits that rural development can be improved through better integration of biophysical or nature, economic or wealth, and governance or power dimensions. And there on the right side of your screen, you can see a Venn diagram that shows the overlap of the nature, wealth, and power dimensions. And in the triangle in the center, at the core of the approach, are the systems principles. In the mid-2010s, my colleagues and I started to ask ourselves, what happened to that Nature, Wealth, and Power framework that we heard so much about during the early 2000s? We set out on a research project in 2020 to explore evolutions in thinking in the world and the international development community, and practical experiences over the 7 years between NWP 2.0 in 2013 and then in 2020, to examine how the framework was still relevant, what might need to be updated, how things in the development sector had changed, and also to take a look at the application of the NWP framework and its applicability to other sectors, such as water conservation. Next slide, please. So to examine the project, we examined the NWP framework against some of the latest literature and project experiences. So this included extensive internet research. We looked at other development organizations such as the UK Department for International Development, the World Bank, OECD, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the Center for Global Development, Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, and on and on. We also held numerous focus group discussions with current and former international development professionals, some of whom were some of the original authors of the Nature, Wealth, and Power framework. And we collected information from current or very recently ended development projects to feature as case studies. So for nature, you will hear from Mr. Thaddeus Binamungu about the USAID Tanzania Protect project. For wealth, you will hear from Darsono Hartono on the Kantingan Mentaya forest concession in Indonesia. And then for power, you will hear from Bukola Ehimati about the USAID Nigeria EWASH project. Next slide. Findings. So some of the key things we found from our research project were that the NWPU framework is certainly still relevant and still respected by the development community. In fact, in some ways, we found that interconnected systems approaches to development programming, such as Nature, Wealth, and Power, have actually become even more valuable and more respected in development programming as we all learn how critical it is to not just look at conservation for conservation's sake, but its interconnectedness with people's livelihoods and also with the power structures that exist in any space in which we're working. In the nature space, we found a growing consciousness of the need to include human motivations in these integrated approaches, and a growing consciousness of our connection to Mother Earth. For example, I think the COVID pandemic has really taught us how inextricably linked we all are to the well-being of this planet. For wealth, we found that there's a growing business case and value proposition for private sector engagement. We found that consumers are more and more questioning how their products were produced, if they were produced sustainably and ethically, if their supply chain uses child labor, for example, or if trees were cut down to make their product. And so we're finding that the corporate social responsibility pledges of the past decade just aren't enough anymore. Now, private sector is finding that doing good is not just something nice to do, it's imperative to the bottom line. And for governance, we found that to affect positive conservation changes, it's critical to assess who holds what power in a space and then to try to harness that power. Next slide. I will now pass it over to my colleague, Thaddeus Binamungu, to present the first case study on the nature dimension, promoting sustainable conservation through engaging communities in data collection in Tanzania. Mr. Binamungu.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Thaddeus Binamungu. I am currently working as the Chief of Party for the Tuhifadhi Maliasili project. The case I'm going to talk about today was implemented during the project which ended last year, known as Protect. This project was addressing dynamics in Tanzania that threatened private sector-led tourism growth. The work on this project revolved under three main pillars. One was institutional strengthening, that is for both public and the private, to be able to manage natural resources for long-term sustainability and viability. The second pillar was the strengthening of the private sector. The third pillar, which is more relevant to the presentation today, was the policy research and advocacy. And under this pillar, we promoted policy making and decision making. Next slide, please. So under this, I will cite a few examples. One was a coastal community. We engaged them in collecting data on the protection of marine resources, including sea turtles, octopus, and the like. What we learned from this exercise, the local communities, was used by the district authorities to come up with a local policy, which led to the terminating of fishing for 3 months. And after realizing that there was overfishing of octopus in the area, and after 3 months of closing the fishing business, when it was opened again, the yield, or the harvest, sorry, increased from 1.5 tons to 3 tons. So demonstrating that the use of the communities to collect data, it is the one which actually revealed that there was overfishing, and therefore development of that local policy now to this big harvest at a later stage. We also predation using smart devices, and what does that help is that we were able to tell areas which had more incidences of live predation, and therefore the initiatives to reduce the level of predation by providing the bombers. Now, this information, and therefore the interventions following the data collected by the communities, we were able to reduce livestock predation incidences by 99%. But all guided by data collected by the communities around the Kilombero area in Tanzania, to collect data on the movement of elephants. We term these as local elephant monitors, to look at the level of crop loss, crop damage, and things of that kind. Using the data collected by these communities, we were able to tell areas with more incidences of crop damage by elephants, and therefore bringing in more targeted interventions to reduce those incidences. We also did the same for another organization in the north on the incidences of poaching. So communities were able to collect that data, and analysis of data guided people who are doing the patrols, because they already now know where we have more incidents. And through that, poaching incidences were reduced by almost 66% based on the data collected by the communities. There are more examples of that kind. But what does this tell us? Through this experience of working with communities, we were able to establish strengthened relationship among community members, communities, and the government. Because, for instance, in terms of data, both the communities, the government, and the private sector, which happened to be working in the areas we were operating in. And also, by collecting data with communities, it has increased the awareness about conservation concerns and that element of ownership among them. Communities were also much more exposed to the ways of improving NRM practices. For instance, in Rwanda, where we established live bombers to protect livestock from predation. We believe that has exposed them to this new practice, which is also good for them, as well as natural resources management, because we do not see more of retaliatory killing of of lions, which were attacking livestock in their homes. And then simplify data sharing among stakeholders, ensure data collection is accurate and consistent. Yeah, through this experience, we were also able to kind of come up with some ways of developing data collection mechanisms, which were kind of simple and manageable by the people on the ground.
I'm sorry, Mr. Binamungo, I believe we're losing you. Let's move on to the next presentation, please, by our colleague Darcy.
At the table with the government. This takes me back to the example I gave. Hello?
Hi, Mr. Binamungo. I'm sorry you've been cutting in and out. Would you like to wrap up your case study on Tanzania Protect, and then we'll hand things over to Mr. Hartono.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, we hear you now.
Sorry, I think there was a problem with my connection. Anyway, the point that I wanted to hammer home is that using communities, we were able to collect information which was able to be used at a local level to come up with some policies which were of importance not only to the communities themselves, but also for policymakers to make higher decisions. Can I now pass over to my friend Kandigan?
Thank you, Mr. Binamungo. My name is Darsono Hartono. Can you all hear me okay? Yes, give me a thumbs. Okay, yes. Thank you for the opportunity for us to share our case study. I'm going to go through basically the wealth aspect of it. For some of you who don't know who I am, I'm actually from Indonesia. We are the project developer of Katingan Mentaya project. Next, which is the world's largest nature-based solution project. So about 13 years ago, I started this endeavor, having an idea that you can save and protect the tropical forest in Indonesia, particularly peatland forest that has a lot of carbon, providing sustainable livelihood for the communities, and finally make money for the company. Of course, year 2007, sustainability is still not part of everybody's idea. The idea that you can do this and selling what we call offset or carbon credit was still quite new at that time. But I think, finally, fast forward 13 years, we start seeing that there is a business proposition of doing good like this. But technically, a private sector can work together with communities, protecting nature, and be able to sell the product to a lot of companies that are currently having a net zero commitment that is part of their low carbon development path, reducing emission and all. But I think most importantly, not only that we are talking about strengthening conservation in Indonesia heavily threatened peatland habitat, which is home to the orangutan, the pangolins, and other endangered threatened species. But more importantly, it's about how we can engage with communities so that they become sustainable. We're transforming their traditional slash and burn farming into a more productive, no chemical, no slash and burn farming. But I think this is a way how we can transform and change behavior on the ground, that creating wealth, not only for the world in terms of the environment integrity of a peatland forest, but particularly for the communities and finally for the company. So I think, this is a new paradigm of doing business where the triple bottom line finally can happen. Because every time when we look into how industrialization affecting us, something has to give, whether it's the environment, sometimes it's the community. There are always some externalities that coming out from everything that we do. But the good news about this project is there is no externalities. We even provide that in a way that people can offset for us. Basically the area itself is 157,000 hectares. For some of you who are not familiar how big 157,000 hectares is, in Asia, I live in Jakarta. So an island of Singapore is like 2 times the size of an island of Singapore. I think if I'm not wrong, it's basically 2 times of the whole New York City metro as well, for some of you who are in New York area. So it is a big, huge area that we are looking to protect and to conserve. By doing that, we are generating an average 7.5 million of carbon credit annually, which is making us, again, the largest project, not by size, but by how much carbon credit that we can save. And this one is equivalent to basically taking off 2 million cars of each year, which is significant. As you know, basically deforestation and land degradation is one of the few sectors that contribute to emission for the world. In order for us to achieve the less than 1.5 degree Celsius that we want to have a path, this sector has to contribute a lot. Next. But of course, the challenge of the project is humongous when we started. When I started this project 14 years ago, people don't understand what we are producing. There's no awareness of offset. But we strongly believe that to build this, we have to go through a very transparent system. We have to have a proper governance, especially with the communities. Hence, we are following an international standard in a voluntary market. So all the credit that we are providing here in a voluntary market is not in a compliance market, and it's being governed by an international standard called PERA. And it's really a very robust, system where it really can show scientifically how much forest that we are saving, what kind of benefit that goes to the community, and we are being audited on an annual basis. But it took us literally, when I started in year 2007, it took us 6 years to get the concession, which is the rights to manage the land in Indonesia. It took us another 4 years to finally start getting sales. I mean, for some of you may be thinking, why would the entrepreneur wanting to do this? I think I was quite lucky because I think I have the persistence, the tenacity to follow. And I think more importantly, I can see that this can change the way we do business. The paradigm changing in terms of doing good, have a purpose. So I think Jennifer mentioned that, you can do good and you can make money out of it. It's something that make you feel satisfied. But of course, if you look at the history even today, there's some resistance to carbon offset, right? Because carbon offset is not the silver bullet of climate change, but it gives that transition for companies who are basically in the transition. You're talking about oil and gas company. It's very hard for them to suddenly not using fossil fuel. But during transition period, they're using offset on a way to bridge that. That's possible. So at the end, basically after 13 years, we can see that the terms that we use, triple bottom line, 2007, where people don't understand, finally, it's being achieved. You can see the social benefit, the economic benefit, and the planet benefit as well. So basically you have the triple P, the planet, the people, and the profit finally merge into this idea. So I think what the lesson learned from here is we can create wealth by doing that. However, we need a lot of things that have to happen. What we're selling is environmental services. We are not selling physical goods. Hence, you need a transparency, consistency, and accountability in what we do. That has to be proven and basically being certified or being tested scientifically. So when we claim that we are reducing emission, we have to have a scientific method of doing that. When we claim that we're giving benefit to communities, then there has to be matrix where we are being measured against. And of course, once we start selling carbon credit, automatically company get revenue and we can make money out of it. So I really hope that with this lesson that we have learned over the 13 years, there is a way of creating wealth that is beneficial for not only the environment, particularly the communities, and finally the private sectors. But I think we need this bridge of private public partnership to move forward. So with that, I'm gonna hand it to my colleague Bukola to talk more about the power. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Katinga. Of course, transparency, consistency, it is when it comes to wealth. Hi, everyone. My name is Bukola Imate, and I'm the Senior Monitoring and Evaluation Advisor with Research Triangle Institute. And I work with the USAID Effective Water and Sanitation Program based in Nigeria. If you don't know where Nigeria is in West Africa. Today, we would like to share lessons from our work supporting transition to autonomous water corporations in urban Nigeria, of course, which is looking at the power dimension. USAID program is currently implementing effective water sanitation hygiene program in Nigeria in 5 states. At the inception of the program conducted a baseline survey in 2018 to actually understand the Nigerian urban context. And findings, a few of our findings in the 5 states where we work shows that water provided by governments controlled state water boards. In all of these 5 state water boards, the government is actually responsible for providing water. And of course, again, we learned through that survey, especially through our literature reviews and just review of existing work, that in 2015, only 61% of urban Nigerians had access to basic drinking water. Some state water boards actually even stopped providing water several years before our intervention, which of course forced residents to turn to using unsafe water sources, such as water tankers or unsafe groundwater. And for a few water utilities under the government that were even producing water, the production was quite intermittent. And of course, there were also issues of quality of the water that they were producing. The focus of our case study is actually in Niger State, one of the states where we work. And the customers in those states, even where water were being produced intermittently, were even also billed inconsistently. Some of them don't even receive bills at all, which of course shows a very weak financial management system of that organization. Then we also learned that due to government's influence, several water board leadership staff were political appointments, and the water board had very few female staff members, with less than 5% of women in leadership roles. Can I go to the next slide? All right. Okay, I guess it's still coming on. All right, okay, continue to understand the context of the processes in Niger State. The program adopted political economy analysis as our context monitoring tool so that we are able to continue to provide support with evidence and of course with learning. Yeah, so by doing political economy analysis to better understand the Niger State water context, the program and the state sector stakeholders realized that where there was political will on the part of government to improve services, the government influence also in a way was hindering water access. And of course, post the inception PEA, of course, we continue to provide advocacy through sector stakeholder, and this led to the governor signing off the WASH policy, setting a pathway for water law in February 2020. Then, of course, the policy received Niger State by House of Assembly, received the law into consent, and of course were eventually approved in May 2020. The water law officially paved the way for Niger State Water and Sanitation Sewerage Corporation. As you can see on the screen, the utility transition from Niger State Water Board. If you can see on my screen, it is showing left. That is the white picture. Niger State Water Board, that was in 2019 and early 2020. And with the support of the program, of course, the WASH law was passed and the water bill was also approved. And that led to the picture we are seeing by the, of course, at the middle, you can see the governor signing of the law, and by the picture on the right showing the transition of the utility to a corporatized organization. And of course, this effectively transferred power and water service provision from a fully controlled water board by the government to a more autonomous water corporation that begins to strengthen its accountability and quality of water production system. We can go to the next slide. All right, talking briefly about achievements from adopting corporate principles. Now that the utility has a more corporatized environment, the water law was closely under the corporatization to focus on internally utility governance and decentralization of responsibilities. Of course, the Water Corporation adopted corporate principles focused on self-reliance, professionalizing services, and of course, they were able to take charge of hiring more qualified staff, and of course, they created a more robust customer engagement system. Then, of course, with the support of the program, the Water Corporation moved from considering consumers, to customers, and of course, which begins to bring in the business orientation to the water organization. And of course, with this, they wanted to understand the potential of the market, and with this, the program supported NISFASEC to conduct a customer enumeration survey, which actually surveyed over 50,000 active and potential customers. As part of the achievements, the Water Corporation, of course, also strengthened its customer care unit to promptly reply to customer complaints. And in addition to that, the corporation was more accessible through its website. With the support of the program, they were able to establish their website, increase media engagement through road talk shows and dialogue and airing of water-related activities on air through television and radio programs. And of course, with these efforts, the agency was able to increase the number of customers by over 3,200 new customers just in the space of getting the autonomy to act as a more business-oriented organization. Then, of course, the organization was now more accountable to stakeholders, and now they prepare audited financial systems and utilize electronic billing and collection system to better track customer payments. And of course, the Water Corporation was able, with this support, to increase their internally generated revenue by collecting and retrieving over 31 million naira. I don't know how much that is in dollars. Maybe someone can help us. Over 31 million naira debts before they became corporatized, or because they've been able to strengthen their financial management system. And of course, through the better commercial and technical operations, the Niger State Water and Sewerage Corporation was also able to reduce their non-revenue water from 89% at baseline when we started with them to 65%. With this, the loss of water reduced drastically. Of course, also with a new corporate lenses, the Water Corporation also concentrated on inclusive policies and gender mainstreaming. And the Water Corporation made intentional efforts to review its workforce, and also developed standard human resource manuals for transparent hiring processes to be able to bring in more qualified staff. And of course, the Water Corporation promoted 4 female staff to new leadership roles. And the Water Corporation also actively empowered women to participate by bringing them to the leadership table. We can move to the next slide. Yeah, of course, in order to also improve accountability, the law called for a board of directors, and of course also set up performance-based contracts and bring up the regulatory agency to ensure that the new system had adequate checks and balances in place. Then the governor also approved the establishment of the Niger Water Corporation directors to the board, where we had 11 members to oversee all decisions by the corporation. The BOD was able to provide impartial advice on the new restructuring of the utility, and of course continue to provide oversight that ensures that will continue to ensure accountability. Of course, the board of directors will also be part of co-signing the performance-based contracts along with the Niger State Water Board and the government. And these documents will be able to keep the agency accountable and for ensuring adequate service provision based on mutually agreed upon key performance indicators. That, of course, is going to be evidence-driven, and of course is going to be a living process as they continue to improve on quality services. Then the Water Corporation will now be monitored by the new Niger State Regulatory Unit. With all the new reforms, it was also necessary that the state sector will have access to more information, and with the support of the USAID program, we were able to support in establishing sector steering committees, establish wash media networks, established more localized community engagements that we call knowledge cafes and customer forum. And of course, more importantly, the program strengthened the civil society components to be able to conduct periodically community scorecards, that can also be able to provide real-time feedback from the beneficiaries to the Water Corporation. We can go to the next slide, which I guess should be last. Yeah, so talking about the power dimension, I would like to note that facilitated by USAID EWASH, the passing of the Niger State 2020 water law was able to shift water service provision from the state, from the government to NISRASEC. In effect, the Water Corporation and sector actors continued to adhere to the law by not removing power from one institution to another, but instead distributing the power, voice, advocacy, feedback, and accountability measures to key stakeholders. This shared equity management has enabled more inclusive decision-making and representation, contributing to the agency's self-reliance, professionalism, and customer orientation. Then in implementing internal reform, the corporation as at date has benefited over 20,000 people with access to improved water services, and of course began to track water wastage within its system. As a corporate organization now, the water utility is now carrying out technical improvements processes to secure existing water supply, and of course to manage water quality as part of its effective utility management drive. We believe that with all this reform, efforts to demonstrate how power shift and governance orientation to for better services has been showcased well in the Niger State system, of course, which started as the water board controlled by the government, lack maybe accountability with little or no system for quality service. But with the distribution of power, bringing stakeholders on board, improving gender and social inclusion, we are beginning to see improved accountability system and of course quality of service delivery to target beneficiaries. Thank you very much for listening, everyone. I will pass this over now to Jane for coordination of the section. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our case study presenters, Bukola, Darsono, and Thaddeus Benamungu for sharing those very real-world examples of the three framework dimensions of nature, wealth, and power. Now we'll move on to the last part of our agenda, the discussion and Q&A. I understand that we got some comments and questions in the chat functions. I'll ask Jonathan to please read out loud the first one from the Zoom chat box, please.
Yes, thank you, Jen. So thank you, Maria. There's a question here for Darsono. Thanking you for your presentation. And then the question is, my question to you on wealth, is there a benefit sharing mechanism which trickles down to the communities? If so, how effective or efficient is this benefit sharing fund mechanism working? Thank you. So Darsono, over to you for the question.
Okay, can you hear me? Because I have an internet question problem earlier. Can you hear me now? Yes, okay. So basically, thank you for such a great question. I think the key is that on the benefit sharing, not only that we have to transparently show how we can give benefit sharing communities, but I think I remember the first few years when we started this, even making carbon, is to create the ecosystem on how this benefit sharing is being distributed. The key is we strongly believe that we should not be giving cash. I think we should be giving program in a way that, enhance and make their productivity higher. We can create, so we can have a very clear guidance and matrix in terms of principle and criteria, how we can help them. So these are the benefit sharings that we do. So we built the whole governance system in terms of how the company will eventually can give money, or in this case, funds to the community based on the village level. And then from there, how they're being distributed and how they can work with communities, particularly for livelihood program, for education and all that. I think it's very key important. People talk about benefit sharing, but I think the key, more importantly, is how we create the ecosystem that the benefit sharing is being transferred in a very transparent manners. Then it's in a way that, we want to make sure that this benefit sharing become a revolving fund for creating a sustainable funding for the communities instead of just giving cash payment, for example. So I think the idea is we built this whole idea of community investment fund. So imagine we want to build microfinances. We want to build basically small entrepreneur, basically micro, all these communities that can be independent. So of course, a lot of this, to give you an idea, basically a lot of our expenses is actually part of the benefit sharing. We allocate up to 15 to 20% of our revenue into this. But I think it's more important is to build that whole system, because we are lucky that we were there. We built this whole ecosystem before even the money has come. So when finally we have revenue from the carbon, it's much easier to distribute that because it's a very bottoms up. It's a very transparent system, and it has a very proper governance. So I think that's how I mean, it's such a great question. That's how the answer is. Thank you.
Thank you, Darsono. I understand we have a question in the Pathable chat. Amrita?
We do. Another one for Mr. Darsono. And so this, you touched upon it a little bit in this previous answer, but thank you, Kenneth, for submitting a question, which is, what is the long-term land use strategy for the site? And also, what is the land tenure for this area? Thanks.
It's another great question. So basically what happened to this area is now we already have a license called ecosystem restoration license. So in Indonesia, all land are owned by state, but state can give basically management rights to private sectors, to communities, so they can be entitled to the natural resources or the carbon credit coming from that rights. So we were given a license called ecosystem restoration license that we are not allowed to cut the trees. So it gives that certainty of tenure for us to work. But of course, that's just a concession from government. But what we need to do with the strategy is how we can have this concession management right and work collaboratively with the community and build a social capital so that we can actually restore and protect this area and provide and then create the carbon credit that eventually will have revenue to come in. So I think in Indonesia, that's how the things are. Of course, every country have their own legal ways to get tenure rights, but I think we can get a tenure rights from the government, but more importantly is to get the tenure rights from community is very key to a success. So, you know, you might get a license from the government, but if the communities are not supporting you, you might not get that. So I think that's a two things that we have to look at every time we do a land use strategy. In the future, I guess every natural resources that you are producing in the area, you have to make sure there's a term called free prior informed consent, meaning that with communities, you have to make sure that you give free information prior to the arrival, then you need a consent from them because they are a stakeholder, and I would even call them, they are the shareholders in what you do. So I think the approach of this inclusive nature wealth is changing now. I know a lot of developing country, when they think that we have rights from the government, we can do whatever we want. But now, just like Jennifer mentioned, the awareness of the buyers, you know, on the supply chain, on all this issue, whether it's you know, human rights abuse, whether it's a climate change issue, people can detect it, people can see it clearly. So I think, you know, at the private sector, it's really time to change the way we do things, because with technology, transparency become something that people can find easily. So I think that's something that we have to look forward for.
Okay, thank you, Darsono. We have one more question in our Zoom chat. This one is for Mr. Binamungu. And the question is comes from Jody Stallings. Thank you, Jody, for your question. It says, access to data is of utmost importance for the NWP framework. For Mr. Binamungu, what are some of the challenges in engaging communities in data collection?
Is Mr. Binamungu still here? We may have lost him. I know he had problems with his connection. I don't see him here. Yeah, thank you for that question, Jody. Again, unfortunately, I think we lost Mr. Binamungu, but I can imagine that some of the challenges are even just introducing the community members to what kind of information we are looking for. Of course, in the development space, we have specific standards for what sort of data we need to collect and how it's collected, and that takes a lot of resources to train up communities on that collection. However, of course, it is the benefit is getting the local communities involved in the data collection so that they can feel more empowered in the conservation of their area, and they have better access to the data themselves to make better decisions. So it is quite an investment of human resources usually, but it's an investment that will hopefully pay off in the long run. So we have here on the screen these two discussion questions that we had posted at the beginning of the presentation in regards to the barriers and the potential solutions to more integrated development programming, and then also other examples of how the NWP framework could be applied to water, examples beyond that which Bukola shared with us from Nigeria, EWASH. Does anyone have any comments to make in regard to those two questions? Any other experiences from our participants that anyone would like to share? I see here there's a comment from Elaine Potter. One barrier at the national level is that WASH, water, sanitation, and hygiene, can be very siloed, making it necessary to work with multiple government ministries, such as the Ministry of Environment, Health, Water, Education, etc. And the power dynamic is often very complex between these stakeholders. Yeah, that's a great point, Elaine. Thank you. You know, when we talked about the power dimension, certainly fraught with a lot of different considerations. One needs to look at the power dimensions at a national level on down to any local level in which a development initiative is working. And so you can have various perspectives and differences in process and resources at all the different levels. So it's certainly a lot to manage, but again, I think the NWP framework has showed us that it is critical to achieving the ultimate conservation goals we hope to achieve, is understanding those power dynamics and to the best of our ability, trying to work within those dynamics, not just ignoring them, because then nothing will ever take hold. Great, well, we're coming up on the end of the hour here. I would like to give my sincere thanks to everyone who has contributed to this research project by RTI. We had a number of different people who we've engaged and who have given their time very generously, and their opinions and thoughts and feedback who were presented there on the left. If anyone thinks of any other questions or comments afterward, please feel free to reach out to myself and my colleagues. Our contact information is there on the right side of the screen. I would again like to give big thanks to our three presenters, Thaddeus, Darsono, and Bukola, for their time and sharing their experiences from Tanzania, Indonesia, and Nigeria. And also to my two colleagues for helping with the presentation today, Jonathan Schwartz and Anita Matani. Thank you so much, and we look forward to being in contact with you all in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining us. Have a great rest of your day. Great weekend ahead. Take care.